they are transferring or they are falling onto the falling onto the stigma of the flower. This is the stigma part of the gynoecium. So the pollen grains, they are fall on the stigma of this gynoecium. Okay, of the same flower. This is the same flower. Pollen grains here, they are transferred onto the stigma of the same flower. So this type of pollination is called as self-pollination. So the self-pollination, it is again of two types. One is called as autogamy and another one is called as zytonogamy. Now what is autogamy? So this is a type of self-pollination in which an intersexual or perfect flower is pollinated by its own pollen. That means what is going to happen here in the autogamy? Auto means a self. The pollen grains of the same plant or the same flower falls on the stigma of the same flower. So this type of self-pollination is called autogamous type of self-pollination. So this occurs by two methods. This autogamy type of self-pollination occurs by two methods. One is called as homogamy and another one is called as clistogamy. Now, what are these two? What are the differences between two? Homogamy here means the anthers as well as the stigma of the flowers, that is the self-pollination here is carried out in the open flowers. That is the flowers are always open. The petals will be opening and the stigma as well as the anthers, they are exposed to the outer environment. So such flowers are called as chesmogamous flowers or they are called as the open flowers. So the autogamous type of self-pollination which is carried out in the open flowers, that is in the chesmogamous flowers, such a type of autogamy is called homogamous type of self-pollination. Next, moving to the clistogamy. So here in this clistogamous flowers, the flowers are closed. That is, the petals are closed. We can see only the bud condition of the flower. The flowers will never open. They are always in a closed manner. So in such, those flowers are called as clistogamous flowers or closed flowers. So in this clistogamous flowers, the only source of self-pollination is autogamy. That is, they does not receive any foreign pollen grain. So the pollination is always carried out by the autogamous type of self-pollination. So these two are the autogamous type of self-pollination carried out in the chesmogamous flowers as well as in the closed or the clistogamous flowers. So this is a beautiful diagram of the flower. You can see here, this is the diagram of in clistogamous flowers, that is the closed flowers. The flowers will never open. They are in the bud condition. And here, this is an example of the homogamous, that is the chesmogamous flowers, homogamy. That is, the flowers will open, the flowers will bloom and the petals will be open and the anthers as well as the stigma, they are exposed to the outer environment. So in this, the homogamous type of self-pollination is carried out. Here, the clistogamous type of pollination is carried out in this both types of flowers. Now, next type of the pollination which is carried out, this is called as zytonogamy or this is also called as cross-pollination. Now, so it is a type of pollination in which the pollen grains of one flower, they are transferred to the pollen grains of the another flower. That is to the stigma of the another flower, which is belonging either to the same plant or to the another plant. So cross-pollination is always refers to the transfer of the pollen grains from one flower to the another flower. So those two flowers, they can belong to the same plant or they belong to the another plant. Right. So what are the advantages of self-pollination? So it maintains the parental characters or purity of the race. So self-pollination is always used to maintain the pure lines for hybridization experiments. And the plant does not need to produce large number of pollen grains. So as the pollination is occurring within the same flower or within the same plant, so there is no need of producing large number of the pollen grains. So plants will restricted to produce only a little number of pollen grains. And the flowers that does not develop any special devices for attracting the insects for pollination. So these are all of the advantages of the self-pollination for a plant. Now, what are the disadvantages here is new characters are not introduced or they are not produced. Whereas the vigor and vitality, that is the hybrid nature of the plants, are not developed. So the rays will decrease. The vitality or the vigor nature of the plants will decrease with prolonged self-pollination. Next, immunity to diseases decreases. That is, if the plant keep on self-pollinating, the immunity of the plant will decrease. Okay. Next, adaptability to changed environment are also going to be reduced. They always becomes sensitive to the changed environmental condition. So these are all are the disadvantages of the self-pollination. Next, moving on to the cross-pollination here. The cross-pollination, it is a transfer of the pollen grains from anther to the stigma of two different flowers or two different plants. So the pollination which is occurring between two different flowers. So such a pollination is called, or two different plants. So such pollination is called as cross-pollination. So this is always performed with the help of, so cross-pollination here is always carried out with the external agency or an external uh, agency or an external factors are required here for transferring the pollen grains. So the pollen grains from this flower, they need to transfer. They have to move from one plant to the another plant. So there should be a means of device for carrying these pollen grains. So always cross-pollination performed with the help of an external agency. Now, what are the different external agencies by which this cross-pollination is carried out? So we can classify that into two categories. One is called as abiotic agencies and another one is called as biotic agencies. So abiotic agencies that like abiotic factors or the abiotic components, mainly the wind and the water. These are the two abiotic factors which will act as the external agency to carry the pollen grains from one flower to the another flower. So if the wind is taking part as an external agency, then that type of pollination, we call it as anemophily type of cross-pollination. And suppose if it is water, then we call it as hydrophilous type of pollination. Hydrophily or hydrophilous type of cross-pollination. Now, suppose if the biotic factors, that is the agents which are going to have the living organisms if taking part in the cross-pollination, then such a type of cross-pollination factors are called as biotic agencies. So here basically the animals will take part here as the biotic agencies for cross-pollination. So we also refer to as zoophilous type of pollination. Zoophily or zoophilous type of pollination. Now, what are the different types of animals are involved here in carrying out the cross-pollination? Insects. The type of pollination here, we call it as entomophily. If birds are involved, we call it as ornithophily type of pollination. If bats are involved, we call it as chiropterophily. Snails, malacophily. Ants, myrmecophily, or snakes, we call it as the ophiophily. So these are the different types of animals which are involved in the cross-pollination to occur in the plants. So they all comes under the biotic external agencies participating in the cross-pollination. So we'll go into the brief description of how the biotic factors as well as the abiotic agencies are involved in carrying out the cross-pollination. So first we'll go for the abiotic agencies. That is, first one, that is the wind. That is the pollination which is the cross-pollination which is occurring through wind. That is called as anemophily or anemophilous type of cross-pollination. Now, so it is a mode of cross-pollination or the transfer of the pollen grains which is carried out through wind. It is called as anemophilous type of pollination. So the examples of the plants where anemophily is quite happens, that is coconut plant, palm, maize, grasses, cannabis. So these are few examples of the plants in which the cross-pollination is always accompanied by wind. So this is called as anemophilous type of pollination. Now, so these plants in which cross-pollination occurs, these plants, they develop some special characteristic features to undergo this cross-pollination. Now, what are those characteristic features the plants will adopt? First thing is the flowers. Here, in this particular plants where anemophilous type of cross-pollination occurs, the flowers are always colorless, odorless, and nectarless. That means the flowers are not attractive. They are not developing. The flowers are just having a pale color or white color of the petals. They does not develop any attractive colors for the petals. So they are colorless. Odorless, that is, it does not produce any odor or fragrance for attracting the insects or for attracting any biotic factors. So they doesn't have any, they does not produce any odor, as well as nectarless. They does not have any nectary glands. They does not produce any nectar. So the flowers are nectarless. Now, so as the flowers are having all the negative characters of the flower, so no biotic factors are attracting towards it. So the only source of pollination is carried out is only through the wind. The next characteristic features are of the pollen grains. So the pollen grains are lightweight in nature, because if the pollen grains are heavier in weight, they can't travel to the long distances through the wind. Okay, so if the pollen grains are heavy, they'll fall nearby the plant only. They can't be carried to the long distances, or they can't be fall on the flowers which are of distance. They can't be traveled to the another different plant. So the pollen grains definitely should be light in weight, and they should be smaller in size and winged. Okay, the size of the pollen grains even should be very smaller in size and winged or dusty. That is, the pollen grains should develop certain external factors, that is, the external characters, like they should possess wing. So with the help of those wing pollen grains, they can travel through the air very easily and can be dropped onto the stigma of the another flowers. Or dusty, that is, they have to be dispersed in a group. Okay, we call it as pollen dust. Next, they should be dry and smooth. Okay, if they are dry only, then the weight of that pollen grains will be very light enough. Okay, if suppose they are wet or they are moist, due to that moisture content, the weight of the pollen grain will increase. So they can't travel through the wind. So the pollen grain should be dry enough. They should have wing pollen grains. They should be smooth, and they are non-sticky and unwettable. That is, the pollen grain should not be sticky enough. If they are sticky, if they fall on the leaf or any part of the plant, they get stick to that particular part. Then pollination can't be occurred. So they should be non-sticky as well as unwettable. That is, they should be dry. Next comes to the stigma. So the stigma of the flower, it should be hairy, feathery, or branched to catch the pollen grains. So suppose this is the one here, the flower, the stigma of the flower, it should also receive the pollen grains of the another plant. So the stigma is modified in such a that it should be feathery, it should be hairy, and it should catch the pollen grains. Next, the pollen grains are produced in very large number. Okay, so that is the reason why we call it as pollen dust. Whenever these pollen grains are dispersed into the air, they are dispersed in a group, but not in single. So that is called as the pollen dust. So you can see here a beautiful diagram here. All these are the pollen grains which are released or dispersed into the air in the group. Okay, we call it as pollen dust. So these are all of the characteristic features of the plant will develop to undergo anemophilous type of cross-pollination. So you can see here, these are all are the pollen grains. Okay. So these are all are the anthers of the stamen which are releasing these pollen grains in the group. So these are the anthers. These are the wind pollinated pollen grains. So you can see here the stigma of the gynoecium or the flower, which is feathery. So if the stigma is feathery, they can easily catch all these pollen grains and fertilization can occur. That is, the cross-pollination will ensure and the fertilization will carried out. So that is about the characteristic features of anemophilous type of cross-pollination. Now we are moving on to the next type of cross-pollination carried out by abiotic factor, that is water, which is called as hydrophilous type of pollination. Now, so hydrophily, it is a mode of pollination or the transfer of the pollen grains, which is carried out through the agency of water. That is basically all the hydrophytic plants, the plants which are living in the water, they will, if they suppose they want to undergo cross-pollination, water is only the means of the source of carrier for carrying the pollen grains. So the agency of water for carrying out the pollination, cross-pollination in hydrophytes, that is the hydrophily. So the example of the plants are Vallisneria as well as the Zoosteria. So these are the plants, these are the hydrophytes in which the cross-pollination is carried out by the water. Now, even these plants, these hydrophytic plants also will develop some special characteristic features to carry on the hydrophily. Now, what are those? First point is the flowers are very small and inconspicuous. That is, the flowers are very, very small developed. So if they are very small, the plants the flowers will not be reached by the other external agents. Now, nectar and odor are absent, so they can't be attracted towards the external biological agents. Now, the pollen grains, they are very light and unwettable due to the presence of mucilage cover. So, as they are very light, the pollen grains can float on the surface of the water, and through that water, they will move to the another plant for pollination. And they are unwettable. That is, these pollen grains are covered by mucilage. So mucilage cover will avoid the pollen grains to absorb the water. So if they absorb the water, the weight of the pollen grains will increase. So if the weight of the pollen grains will increase, they sink to the bottom of the pond. So our purpose is the pollen grains should float on the water. So through the streams of the water, the pollen grains has to reach the another plant. So that is the reason why the pollen grains are covered with mucilage for non-absorbing of the water. Now the stigma here, the stigma will be long, sticky. Okay, the flowers which are going to develop the stigma, they are long. The stigma is very, very long so that it can attract the pollen grains of the another flower. And it should be sticky also so that they get stick to the stigma. So these are the characters of a hydrophytic plant for ensuring the cross-pollination. So this is an example of Vallisneria plant where the hydrophily is carried out on the surface of the water. Okay. So here this is the male flowers as well as the female flowers. They will be floating on the surface of the water. So from the male flower, the pollen grains are released, and through the water, these pollen grains, they'll reach the stigma of the female flower and the pollination is carried out. So such type of hydrophily is referred to as epihydrophilous type of pollination. Now here this is the example of Thalassia where the pollination is referred to as hypohydrophily. That is, the pollination is carried out within, that is, inside the water. These are the submerged plants. These are the examples of a submerged plant. That means the plants or the flowers, they never reach the top of the water surface. But that is, they are submerged. They are inside the water level. They never come up the water level. So in such plants, the pollination, the cross-pollination is occurring inside the water levels. So this is called as hypohydrophily. That is, the pollen grains of this male flower will released into the waters, and through this water current or through the water waves, these pollen grains will reach the female flower. They'll stick to the stigma and the pollination is carried out. So if the pollination is occurring inside the water surface, that is hypohydrophily. And if it is occurring on the surface of the water, that is epohydrophilous type of cross-pollination. Next, moving on to the cross-pollination which is carried out through the biotic agencies, that is the animals. Now, the first type of biotic agents which are carrying out the cross-pollination, those are the insects. And such a type of cross-pollination here is called as entomophily. So the pollen grains which are transferred to a mature flower through the agency of insects, that pollination is called entomophily or entomophilous type of cross-pollination. So generally the insects like butterflies, moths, honeybees, beetles, wasps, these are all the different type of insects which will participate here, or they are the one which are acting like biotic agents taking part in the cross-pollination. But here, one point to be remembered is the insects here, they are not directly participating in the pollination. Never they participate. When these insects, they visit the flower for the collection of nectar, in that period of time, the cross-pollination is ensured by the plant. It is not the direct participation of the insects in the cross-pollination. They are always the carriers. They act as the carrier of the pollen grain. That's it. But the insects only visit the flower for collection of the nectar, but not for the pollen grains. So these are these insects, they act as a carrier of the pollen grains from one flower to the another flower. They are indirectly participating in the pollination. So such type of pollination here we call it as entomophily. Now, so to these flowers, so the plants which are undergoing entomophilous type of pollination, so these plants will develop certain attractive floral characteristic features so that the insects can visit this flower and the pollination can be ensured. Now, what are the characteristic features do these plants or the flowers develop to attract the insects? Now, the first one is the plants are going to develop showy or brightly colored flowers. So this is the plant you can see here. The color of the flower is very bright. They are reddish or pinkish, or the flowers will be very bright. They have a very bright colors, and the shape of the flower is also showy. That is, they will attract, the size of the flower will also be a very bigger enough so that they can be seen by the insect. It can be in the visibility of the insect, and the color of the flower or the petals will be attracted to the insect so that they can visit the flower. Okay. So the showy and the brightly colored of the petals or the flower will attract the insects towards the plant. That is first characteristic feature. Second one is the flowers will develop, the petals are in such a way that they will give a platform, a landing platform for the insect to land perfectly on them. Just like a aeroplane. If the aeroplane will have a very good runway, a very good platform, then only the plane can land successfully on the ground. In the same manner here, the flowers are developed in such a way that they'll give a landing platform for the insects to land on it. So the mostly all the insect pollinated flowers will develop a very big petals. The size of the petals will be very bigger enough so that the insect can fall on it very easily. Next, the pollen grains. The flowers will develop the pollen grains in such a way that they are spiny, they are heavy, and they are surrounded by a yellow sticky substance. Okay, majority of all the insect pollinated pollen grains, they are yellowish in color. So you can see here in the flower, the middle part, they are all are the anthers which are releasing the yellow color pollen grains. So these pollen grains, they are spiny. That is, their pollen grains are going to develop the exine, the external cover of the pollen grain will be spiny enough, and they are yellowish in color sticky substance for attaching to the insect legs or wings or to the mouth parts. Next, another characteristic feature here is the stigma are often inserted and sticky stigma, and some flowers, they provide a safe place to the insects for laying the eggs. So the flowers are also have the characteristic features of providing a space like pollen sac or the disc-like structures where the insects can lay the eggs very safely within the flower. So these are all are some of the characteristic features which are developed by the plant to ensure the entomophilous type of cross-pollination. So this is how the cross-pollination is carried out within the plant or the flower. So first, the pollen from the stamen. So first, the insect will get attracted towards the flower by all these characteristic features. And first, the pollen from the stamens. Okay, when the insect falls on the stigma or the flower, the pollen grains from the anthers, they stick to the bees, and this is the bee here with the attached pollen grain to their wings or to the legs. Now this bee, it will be traveling from one flower to the another flower. So when this bee is reaching another plant, then the pollen which is sticked to the uh, wings of the bee or to the legs, they will be getting stick to the stigma of the another flower. So like this, the bees, when they visit from one flower to the another flower, the pollination is being carried out. That called pollination, we call it as anemophilous type of pollination. Next comes to the another biotic agency of carrying out the cross-pollination. that is ornithophily. Now, what is this ornithophily? That is the pollination which is carried out with the help of birds. So it is a mode of cross-pollination which is performed by the birds. So only a few types of birds are involved here in carrying out this type of cross-pollination. So this type of pollination is referred to as ornithophily. And the birds which are participating here in this pollination, they are, the size of the bird is very, very small, and they have the long beaks. So it is a type of ornithophilous type of pollination which is carried out by the birds. So these birds, they are going to develop a small size, and the size of the bird will be very, very small, and they develop a very long beaks. Now here, to attract these birds, the plants are going to have some characteristic features, like the plants are going to develop very bright colored flowers like red color, orange, yellow, or blue color flowers, so that the color of the flowers will be getting attracted to the birds, and the birds will visit the flower for collecting the nectar or for their eating habits. So plants will develop very bright and attractive flowers. And the floral parts are commonly leathery. That is, the petals of the flower, they are very thicker enough so that the bird's eyes can be landed on the flowers very easily. Okay, and they are very leathery. Next, these flowers, they secrete abundant watery nectar, or they have the edible parts. So generally these birds, they visit the flowers for having the food. So for sucking the nectar, or for the uh, petals, for consuming of the petals or the floral parts, they will visit the flower. So these plants, they develop edible parts of the flower as well as watery nectar. And the scent is often absent, that is, they does not develop any fragrance. These flowers, they are not having a very good aroma. So the fragrance of the flower is generally absent, which is not required for the flower as such. That is, the bird will get attracted towards the flower by its only the color as well as the edible nature of the floral parts. So these are the characteristic features of the plant will develop for ornithophilous type of cross-pollination. Now, so now these are the methods the plants will adopt. So this is about the characteristic features of cross-pollination, which is carried out by birds, insects, and these are the abiotic factors, that is wind as well as the water. Now we are moving on to the methods of the plant will ensure to definitely undergo cross-pollination. Now, what are these methods? We also call them as contrivances of the plant to develop cross-pollination, to ensure cross-pollination. Now, what are these? The plants will show dichogamy, or the plants will develop dichogamous type of cross-pollination. Now, what do you mean by dichogamy here? The anthers and the stigmas, they mature at different times in a bisexual flower to prevent the self-pollination. So generally here to know about this, majority of the flowers are bisexual. That is, the flowers are going to develop the male reproductive part as well as the female reproductive part in the same plant. That is in the same flower. That is, this is a carpel, that is a pistil, and these are all the stamens. So if the flower is going to have both, this is androecium and the gynoecium, we call them as bisexual flower. So generally, majority in all the bisexual flowers, self-pollination is possible. There's a possibility of self-pollination in bisexual flower. But in bisexual flowers also, cross-pollination can be possible. That is, the plants will ensure in these plants, in bisexual flowers, to ensure cross-pollination. How? That is by the protandry. That is by the dichogamy condition. So what is this dichogamous condition? That means in these flowers, in these bisexual flowers, the anthers and the stigmas, they are maturing at different time intervals. That is, suppose here in this bisexual flower, anthers are matured first. That is, the anthers are releasing the pollen grain. But here, the stigma is not ready to accept this pollen grain. Okay, that because it is immature, it is not yet mature. So it is immature. It is not accepting. It can't accept the pollen grains of this anther to fall on it. Okay, so such a condition is called dichogamy. In such cases, self-pollination is avoided. Here, the self-pollination can't be occurred. There is no self-pollination carrying out here. So what will happen now? The pollen grains of this flower, now they will be dispersed into the surrounding environment and they will be reaching another flower to carry on the cross-pollination. So such a condition is called dichogamy or dichogamous condition. Maturity of the anthers and the stigma at a different time intervals. So this dichogamous condition will always ensure cross-pollination to prevent the self-pollination. Now, so in this dichogamy condition, there are two cases which can be happen. That is protandry condition and protogyny. Now, what is protandry here? Proto means first. Andry means andrecium. So the maturity of the anthers will be happening first when compared to the stigma. So look into this diagram here. This is a protandry. That is the andrecium. That is the anthers are maturing earlier than compared to the stigma. So their pollen grains become available to the stigma of the another flowers, not to the same flower. So the example are the sunflower and the salvia. So these plants, they will follow the protandrous type of condition to ensure cross-pollination. Next, protogyny. Here, proto, first gynoecium. That is, stigmas are maturing here first when compared to the anthers. So at that, as here, the anthers are not releasing any pollen grains and the stigmas are ready here, they are matured. So these stigmas, they can receive the foreign pollen grain, that is the pollen grains of the another flower to ensure cross-pollination. So this condition is called protogynous condition or protogyny, and maturity of the anthers first, this is called as protandrous condition or protandry, and these two comes under the dichogamous type of cross-pollination. Next, moving on to the second controversy, that is second adaptation for the flower to ensure cross-pollination, that is Hercogamous. So in a bisexual flower, the structure of the male and the female sexual organs itself proves a barrier for the self-pollination. That means to say here, hercogamic. That means the position of the style as well as the stamens. The position of the style as well as the stamens, they lie at the different levels. So such a condition is called hercogamy. So for example, if you see here in this A flower, the, the position of the, that is the level of the style, okay, the height of the style is very long and the stigma is facing upside. But see the stamens here. The stamens are below the level of the stigma. Okay, so they are lying very inside. The stamens are deep-seated inside the flower. They are not coming up. Only the stigma and the style, they are reaching the topmost level of the flower. Okay, so in this condition, the anthers, if they release the pollen grain, they can't reach the stigma of the same flower. So here there is the avoidance of self-pollination. Self-pollination is very, very uh, impossible, okay, for the pollen grains to reach the top level and fall on the stigma. So self-pollination here, it is avoided. But rather, the pollen grains here will be coming from a different flower. The stigma will receive the pollen grain from a different flower to carry on the cross-pollination. Here in the bee flower, the flower in this bee case, the pollen grains are the length of this filament. Okay, the length of the filament of the stamen is very much long. The filaments are long, as whereas the style, the length of the style is short. So the stigma style, that is the carpel, is inside the flower, whereas the stamens are coming out of the flower. Okay, due to the presence of the long filaments. So presence of different levels of the style and the filament, or the style and the stamens, such a condition is called hercogamous type of condition, where the cross-pollination is only carried out and the male and female sexual organs, they both are acting like a barrier for avoiding the self-pollination. So this is a second method adopted by the plant to ensure cross-pollination. Next one is the self-sterility or self-incompatibility. Now, what is the self-sterility? The pollen grains of the flower, they do not germinate if they fall on the stigma of the same flower due to the presence of the sterile gene in the pollen grain. That means to say here, self-sterile. The flowers are self-sterile. That means the pollen grains, if they fall on the stigma of the same flower, the pollen grains will not develop any pollen tube. That is, the pollen grains will not mature. The pollen grains will not carry the male gamete. They're not develop the pollen tube, or they'll not take part in the germination, that is in the fertilization process. So that is due to the absence or the presence of the sterile genes in them. That is called as self-sterility or self-incompatibility. Okay, the stigmas, if they are receiving here the pollen grain of the same flower, then the sterile gene will become active. As the sterile gene will active, the pollen grains will not develop or they not take part in the fertilization process. So this is called as self-incompatibility or self-sterility. The next, another method of undergoing cross-pollination in the plants, that is heterostyly. Hetero means different, styly means styles. That means to say the flowers here are going to develop different height of the styles as well as the stamens. This is called as heterostylous condition. So here there are two different types of heterostylous condition. One is called as dimorphic heterostyly and another one is called as triheterostyly. Now, in the diheterostyly, there are two types of flowers. One is going to have long style and short stamens. And another example where the flowers are developing short style and the long stamens. So the examples for this diheterostylous condition is the hydrophytes like primula and primrose. Whereas in triheterostyly, that is a single plant which is going to have three different types of styles. So the height of these styles will be short, medium, as well as long. So three different types of styles can be observed within a same flower. So such condition is called triheterostylous condition. So these are the different contrivances or the methods which are adopted by the plants to ensure cross-pollination and avoiding of self-pollination. So now we are going to discuss about, so this is about the natural phenomenon of cross-pollination carried out by the plants. So here, in the advancement of the science and technology, so this cross-pollination can also be carried out by the artificial method, which is called as hybridization. That is, by the involvement of a human being also, the cross-pollination can be carried out. And this technique is called as hybridization technique. So this technique, it is used for the purpose of hybridization. That is, it involves a pollination of the desired female with pollen from the desired male plant. That is, the pollen grains of a male flower can be transferred to the stigma of the female parent of a desired plant. But this purpose, for the precautions to be taken to prevent the contamination of the stigma with undesired pollen. So here the pollination is of desirous pollination. That is, we are dropping the pollen grain of the desired plant onto a desired female. So here it is a desirous cross-pollination is carried out, which is called as the hybridization to acquire the hybrid varieties or to acquire the superior plants among the normal varieties. So in unisexual plants, it is the procedure is simple, but we are going to carry out even in the bisexual plants also. So in a unisexual plant, a male plant from the male plant, the pollen can be collected and can be dropped into the stigma of the female unisexual flower. But in case of bisexual flowers, where there are stamens as well as the stigma, that is the anthers as well as the stigma. So the bisexual flowers, the self-pollination has to be avoided. So in such case, the two processes can be carried out in a bisexual flower. One is called as emasculation and another process is called as bagging. Now, what is here the emasculation procedure? So in this emasculation procedure from a bisexual flower, the anthers of the stamens are removed so that the flowers can be transformed into a female flower. That is emasculation, removal of the pollen grains. Emasculation, removal of the male part of the flower. That is removal of the anthers. So if the anthers are removed, there is no question of any pollen grains. So now the flower will be a unisexual female flower. So on the stigma of this flower, we can shed the foreign pollen grains on that for carrying out the cross-pollination mechanism. So this is the flower. You can see this is the stigma and the anther. So here these anthers are removed and the flower is transformed into a female flower. Only you can see here the female flowers are only the female part, that is the carpel is only left over, changing of this bisexual flower into a unisexual female flower. This is emasculation. Now what is bagging here? Once the flower has been pollinated with the foreign pollen grains, then this female flower has to be bagged. It has to be covered with the polythene bags so that the unwanted pollen grains can't be dropped onto this stigma. So we are doing here the hybridization procedure of a desirous pollination. So we are avoiding the undesired pollen grain to be dropped onto the stigma. So for that purpose, after the emasculation procedure is carried out, immediately the flowers has to be bagged with the polythene bags to avoid unwanted cross-pollination. So these two processes are the most important steps in the artificial pollination, that is hybridization techniques. Now, so what are the advantages as well as the disadvantages of this cross-pollination? The cross-pollination, as here we told you, introducing of the foreign pollen grain into the flower. So we can get the genetic recombination. Hence, the variations in the progenies can be achieved. Now, it increases the adaptability of the offsprings to the changed environmental conditions, and it makes the organisms better fit for struggle for existence. And the plants produced through the cross-pollination, they are more resistant to the disease when compared to the self-pollinated plants. Now, what are the disadvantages here? The factor of chance is always involved in the cross-pollination. It is less economical. More undesirable characters can be achieved here. So that is one more disadvantage. The very good characters of the rays are likely to be spoiled. So these are all the disadvantages of the cross-pollination. So these are the examples. So thank you. This is about the pollination topic of self and the cross-pollination.